Another issue that we might run into is that our router is picking an unexpected route to get to a destination. And this is the case for IP version 4 as well as for IP version 6. And what might be happening here is a router can learn about routes from various sources. We could have locally connected networks, and we know about those because we're connected to those networks. We could have statically configured networks. We could have dynamically learned networks. And remember how a router makes its routing selection. It's going to pick a route based on administrative distance. Who has the most believable entry for a specific route? If I've got different routing sources saying that they know how to get to the same network, I'm going to pick the routing source that has the lowest administrative distance. That's the one that's going to be injected into the IP routing table. And maybe we have a network being advertised for OSPF, and that same network is being advertised for EIGRP, and I want to use the one for OSPF. Is there a way to do that without changing the administrative distance? Yeah, there is a way. We could go in and we could do some filtering. We could filter out routes from being learned by our routing process. So let's go out to a live interface and let me show you how we might do that. Let's go over to router R1 and let's create an access control list that's going to be used or could be used to filter out a route. Let's say access-list, and we can just give a standard access list. I'll say access list 1, permit, and let's find a route that I want to filter. Let's say that I want to filter the 10.1.2.8 network, and we're going to give a wildcard mask of 0.0.0.3. This is the network between routers R2 and R4. And that access list is going to match that network. And I now want to prevent that network from being injected into EIGRP. Well, let's create an EIGRP routing process. I'm going to say router EIGRP1, and I can use a distribute list. I can say distribute list 1, the access list number is 1, and I'll say in the inbound direction. And just by doing that, when EIGRP is learning routes, it's not going to learn that specific route. I could have OSPF also enabled on this router, and it could learn that route. That means that even though EIGRP has a lower administrative distance, it has a 90 administrative distance as compared to OSPF, which has an administrative distance of 110, we're still going to be using the OSPF route because I've blocked this one route from being injected into EIGRP. Next, let's take a look at some show commands we could use to do our troubleshooting of IP version 4 and IP version 6 static routes. And also how we look at our routing table and see what administrative distances are being used by different routing sources. We've already taken a look at some of these out in the live interface, but let's go out to the live interface once again and review a few of these. Let's, on router R1, do a show IP route. This is how we can look at our IP version 4 routing table. And in this case, we haven't dynamically learned anything, but here's that static route that we configured earlier. If I do a show IPv6 route, that's going to show me my IP version 6 routes. Again, I haven't learned anything dynamically on this router, but we've got the static route that we configured earlier. Also, we talked about proxy ARP. Remember that? We could do a show IP interface followed by the interface identifier. Let's do that on router R1, and we could see whether or not proxy ARP was enabled. In this case, yep, it is enabled, and we talked about how we might turn that off. Also, let's go over to router R2 because I do have some dynamic routing configured there. I could do a show IP route or show IPv6 route. If I were working with IPv6 networks, I could do a show IP route to see different routes in my routing table and the administrative distance of those routes. For example, OSPF, here's an OSPF learned route we see by this code, the O, and we see the 110. The 110 is indicating that that's the administrative distance. The 65, by the way, that's the OSPF cost, but we're paying attention to the 110. And if we go over and take a look at router R1, it had a statically configured route. If I do a show IP route there, notice the static route, it has an administrative distance of a 1, but we saw that we could administratively make that a different value.